Welcome to Dreaming Minds. Tonight, you are invited to step away from the weight of the day and begin a gentle journey that slowly carries you away from your other thoughts. It softly guides your attention toward calm listening, where understanding can rest and curiosity can drift without pressure or demand. It is meant to be received gently, like a soft background light, resting behind closed eyes. As you settle in, allow your breathing to soften and your body to feel fully supported. The universe will come to you slowly, calmly, and without effort or urgency. Before there were stars or darkness, before light had direction or purpose, there was a moment when existence itself was user of its shape and quietly new in its own way. Not confused and not chaotic, simply unfamiliar with itself. The universe had just begun, and in its earliest state, it did not move with force or urgency of any kind. It did not arrive loudly or suddenly. It emerged quietly, like awareness returning after a deep and dreamless sleep. In this earliest phase after what we later call the Big Bang, there was no sense of drama or disturbance at all. No sound echoed through space, because space itself was still learning what it meant to exist in a stable way. Everything was close, not crowded but gently and intimately connected. There were no edges, no borders and no distances to cross. The universe was not yet a place in the usual sense. It was a condition, a gentle presence slowly unfolding over time. Instead of expansion that feels fast or violent, imagine a slow release and a careful letting go. Space did not burst outward with force or pressure. It relaxed gradually and evenly. It allowed itself to become more than it had been, moment by moment and without strain. This was the first breath of space, not taken sharply but deeply and calmly, as if the universe itself sensed the need for patience and balance. At this stage, nothing had identity or individual purpose yet. There were no particles with roles to play, and no forces competing for influence. Everything existed in a shared state, evenly balanced and quietly present together. The laws that would later govern motion and structure had not yet settled into place. The universe was not yet organized, but it was not disordered either. It existed as open space in a calm and spacious way. This openness carried a deep sense of safety and ease. Without distance, there was no separation to create tension. Without separation, there was no isolation to create loss. Everything that existed belonged naturally and without effort. The universe did not yet know how to be alone, and so loneliness had no meaning at all. This early closeness was not heavy or overwhelming. It was gentle and reassuring, like warmth before heat gains intensity. As space continued to expand, it did so evenly and without preference or direction. There was no center pushing outward and no edge pulling away. Expansion was not movement through space itself. It was the quiet creation of space everywhere at once. New room appeared gently and steadily, as if the universe was stretching in its sleep, unaware of effort and guided only by balance. Time, in these early moments, was not a sequence of ticking instants or measured intervals. It was more like a slow unfolding of presence over duration. Moments did not rush to replace one another. They lingered comfortably and fully. Change happened, but so gradually that it felt almost like rest. The universe was not counting seconds. It was gently learning duration and continuity. In this calm beginning, energy existed without urgency or pressure. It did not rush to transform or strain to become something else. Everything was held in a soft equilibrium, where change was possible but never required. This allowed the universe to remain stable while it slowly discovered its own capacity to grow. As space gently widened, the universe began to sense difference. Not separation yet, but subtle variation. Slight shifts in density, delicate changes in balance, and barely noticeable movements within the whole. These differences did not disrupt the calm. They were part of a natural settling process, like faint ripples fading on still water. This was a universe learning how to be quiet, not silence as absence, but quiet as harmony and cooperation. Nothing needed to assert itself, nothing needed to dominate. Everything existed in relation rather than competition. This early calm would later make structure possible, because stability allows complexity to grow, without collapse. Light had not yet taken on the role we recognize today. It did not travel across distances or illuminate forms. It existed more like a background presence, gently woven into the fabric of the universe itself. There was no brightness to perceive and no darkness to contrast against. Vision had no meaning yet. As the universe expanded further, the idea of distance slowly and carefully emerged, not suddenly and not sharply. Space learned how to give things room, how to allow separation without loss. This was an important lesson. Distance did not mean disconnection. It meant freedom. It meant space to breathe and to rest. With this growing room, the universe became more comfortable within itself. The initial closeness softened into a gentle spacing, allowing the earliest forms of structure to become possible later on. But at this stage, nothing rushed ahead. Everything unfolded at the steady pace of balance. This patience is easy to overlook when we imagine beginnings. We often expect energy and speed, but the universe began with restraint and quiet control. It allowed itself to stabilize before it complicated itself. This restraint is what made endurance possible. A universe that starts calmly can last. As you listen, there is no need to picture these moments clearly or precisely. Even scientists rely on imagination here, because language struggles to describe a reality without familiar reference points. What matters is the feeling, a sense of openness, a sense of calm expansion, a sense that existence itself began gently. The first breath of space was not an action, it was a permission. Permission for room to exist, permission for time to unfold, permission for silence to become meaningful and supportive. This permission set the tone for everything that followed. In this early universe, nothing was required to shine or stand out. Nothing needed attention. Existence did not perform. It simply continued in a steady way. This allowed the universe to settle into itself, to become comfortable with being rather than doing. As expansion continued, stability increased. The universe became less fragile and more self-sustaining. It learned how to hold itself together without effort. This quiet strength would later allow stars to form and galaxies to gather. But for now it expressed itself as calm endurance. Imagine floating within this early space. There is no direction to face, no sensation of speed, no sense of falling. You are simply present, supported by the balance of everything around you. The universe does not pull or push. It holds gently and steadily. This holding is important. It creates trust. The universe trusts its own structure. It trusts that expansion will not tear it apart. It trusts that change can happen slowly enough to remain gentle and safe. As this first chapter draws toward its close, the universe rests within its own openness. Space has learned to breathe. Time has learned to wait. Silence has learned to exist without fear. Nothing more is needed. In the next part of the story, time itself will begin to settle into rhythm. But for now, the universe remains in this calm beginning, and you are free to rest with it, letting awareness drift as softly as space once did. As time learned how to slow and hold itself steady, another change began to unfold quietly within the universe. Light, which had existed without direction or urgency, started to transform in a gentle way. Not suddenly, and not dramatically. It did not dim all at once, or fade away. Instead, it softened gradually. It learned how to release tension and how to remain present, without rushing forward. In the earliest stages, light was not something that traveled across space, or revealed shapes. It was woven into everything, indistinguishable from the space around it. There was no contrast, no brightness, and no shadow to create difference. Light existed as potential rather than experience. It carried energy, but it carried no urgency. It did not need to go anywhere at that time. As the universe expanded and time stretched gently, light began to change its relationship with motion. It no longer needed to remain tightly bound to everything at once. With more space available and more time to unfold, light discovered that it could move calmly, without pressure, and without haste or strain. This was not light slowing down from speed. It was light learning restraint and composure. Light learned that it did not need to rush across space to fulfill its role. Instead, it could remain steady, spreading gently and evenly, allowing space to adjust around it. This calm movement allowed the universe to become more comfortable within itself. As light cooled, its intensity softened in a stable way, not fading away completely, but settling into balance. It became less demanding and more supportive. Instead of overwhelming everything it touched, light began to rest within space, offering presence rather than insistence. This change made the universe feel quieter, even though nothing had been removed. With this cooling, light began to separate from its earliest state of closeness. It no longer existed everywhere in the same way at the same time. Gradually it learned how to travel, but it traveled without urgency or force. It moved as if guided by patience, filling space gently rather than striking it. This gentle movement created the earliest sense of illumination, though there were still no eyes to see it. Illumination here meant clarity rather than brightness. Space became more defined, not sharply, but softly and evenly. The universe began to distinguish itself from within, without contrast or conflict. As light settled into this calmer state, it allowed allowingness. It allowed space to hold it comfortably. It allowed time to shape it naturally. It allowed silence to surround it without resistance. Light no longer pressed forward. It rested with confidence, knowing that movement would happen when conditions were ready. The cooling of light also reduced strain within the universe. Energy that rushes creates instability. Energy that rests creates balance. Light learned balance through patience. It learned how to exist without forcing change. This made the universe more resilient and less fragile over time. As light became calmer, it began to interact with space in a gentler way. Instead of overwhelming differences, it allowed variations to persist. Subtle distinctions in density and structure were no longer erased. Light respected the quiet differences forming within space. This respect allowed early structure to remain intact long enough to matter. Light did not wash everything away. It held still long enough for patterns to begin forming later. Without this restraint, nothing could have remained long enough to gather and stabilize. In this stage, light did not yet shine in the way we recognize today. Shining requires contrast. Contrast requires distance and shadow. Those conditions would come later. For now, light existed as a calm presence, evenly distributed, softly present and deeply patient. As the universe continued its steady expansion, light learned how to accompany it rather than dominate it. Light did not lead change or force direction. It followed change gently. It adapted to the growing room available, spreading calmly and without resistance. This adaptation allowed harmony to deepen. Light, space, and time were no longer separate processes. They moved together, adjusting to one another continuously. None rushed ahead, none lagged behind. Everything remained coordinated through calm balance. The cooling of light also allowed silence to deepen further. Without harsh intensity, there was no disruption. The universe felt smoother, quieter, and more stable. Silence was no longer just the absence of sound. It became the absence of strain and pressure. As light rested, it created an environment where future clarity could exist without shock. When illumination eventually arrived, it would not arrive violently. It would reveal gently. This gentleness was learned here, in this quiet cooling. Imagine light not as brightness, but as warmth, that has settled, not heat, but comfort. Light becomes like a presence that reassures rather than demands attention. It fills space without overwhelming it or pulling focus. In this phase, light no longer competed with silence. It complemented silence naturally. Silence held space open. Light rested within that openness. Together they created calm continuity. Nothing flickered, nothing pulsed. Everything remained steady and reliable. The universe became easier to exist within, even without observers. Conditions were becoming supportive rather than extreme. Extremes strain systems. Balance preserves them. Light learned balance by learning how to rest. As light cooled further, it allowed time to deepen its rhythm. Without rapid fluctuations, time could continue its gentle flow. Nothing forced acceleration. Nothing demanded reaction. Everything unfolded with patience and ease. This calm illumination laid the groundwork for future perception. Perception requires light that does not overwhelm. It requires light that reveals without force. The universe was quietly preparing for this by teaching light how to soften. As you listen, there is no need to imagine brightness. Imagine instead a gentle glow behind closed eyes, present, steady, and comforting. Light here does not wake you. It supports rest and calm awareness. The cooling of light also reduced contrast within existence. Without sharp differences, the universe remained unified. This unity prevented fragmentation. Everything remained part of the same calm field of presence. As expansion continued, light maintained its composure. It did not scatter wildly. It followed the rhythm of time and the openness of space. This cooperation preserved stability as the universe grew larger. Light now had a role, even if it was not yet visible. Its role was to maintain balance, to allow clarity without disruption, and to rest without disappear. This role would remain important throughout cosmic history. As this chapter moves toward its close, light has fully learned how to slow. It no longer rushes. It no longer presses forward. It rests within space, supported by time and surrounded by silence. The universe feels smoother now, softer, less strained. Light no longer pulls attention. It simply exists, steady and calm, allowing everything else to continue without pressure. In the next part of the story, distance itself will begin to take shape more clearly, as space learns how to give everything room to breathe. For now, light remains settled, calm, and present, and you are free to rest within that gentle glow, allowing your own thoughts to soften and drift as easily as light once learned to do. Distance did not arrive as loss or absence. Distance arrived as comfort and reassurance. As the universe continued to expand with calm stability, space began to discover that room could feel kind, and that separation could feel safe rather than frightening. In the earliest closeness, everything had been together in a shared presence. Now, without breaking that belonging, the universe began to make gentle space between things, as if it were learning how to inhale more fully and how to exhale more smoothly. This change was subtle and gradual. It did not appear like a sudden gap or break. It formed like a soft widening, a quiet easing apart, similar to the way a hand relaxes when it stops gripping. Space did not push anything away with force. Instead, it offered room. It gave each forming thing a little more freedom to exist without pressure from what was near. The universe was learning a new kind of kindness, the kindness of letting things have their own calm place. In this chapter, distance is not cold or empty. Distance is not loneliness or separation. Distance becomes a protective cushion, a gentle boundary that allows rest and ease. When distance appears, it does not mean that connection is gone. It means that connection can breathe. It means closeness can become comfortable instead of intense. As room increases, the universe begins to feel calmer and more settled, not because it becomes empty, but because it becomes spacious. Spaciousness can hold complexity without strain. Spaciousness can hold change without panic. The universe is slowly becoming a place where nothing needs to collide in order to interact. Things can influence one another across calm room. They do not need to fight for the same point. They can share the same wide field of space. Imagine a quiet shoreline at night, where the water meets the sand without force. Each wave comes in and then recedes, leaving space behind it. That space is not absence or loss. That space is part of the rhythm itself. Gentle distance becomes like that shoreline. It is the natural interval between motions, the calm region between events, the soft pause that makes the whole scene feel safe and balanced. As the universe expands, space learns to act like a Ella, rather than a barrier, not a wall, not an obstacle, but a steady room that holds everything without squeezing. In a sheltered room, nothing needs to press against you. You can relax your posture. You can let your breath settle naturally. The universe begins to offer this kind of shelter, on a scale beyond imagination, but with a feeling that remains surprisingly familiar. Distance also allows quiet organization to emerge. When everything is too close, every change touches everything else instantly. That kind of immediate contact can be overwhelming. Gentle distance introduces delay, and delay creates softness. With delay, influence becomes gradual. With delay, change becomes less shocking. The universe learns to soften cause and effect, giving reality a smoother way to respond. This is one of the hidden comforts of distance. It makes the world feel less sharp. It gives time for adjustment. It gives room for balance to return. When space spreads out, it creates gentle transitions instead of sudden jolts. It becomes easier for the universe to remain stable and composed. In this calm widening, emptiness begins to be understood as a positive presence. Empty space becomes a place where nothing harms you. It becomes a place where you can rest between thoughts. It becomes a quiet field where motion can happen without collision. It becomes a pause that belongs to the universe, and also a pause that belongs to you as you listen. Some people hear the word emptiness and imagine fear or loss. They imagine being lost or disconnected. But the universe did not experience its growing room as being lost. It experienced it as becoming comfortable. Room allowed the universe to stretch without strain. Room allowed energy to settle without pressure. Room allowed the fabric of reality to stop feeling crowded. Gentle distance also creates a new kind of safety. Safety comes from predictable boundaries, not tight boundaries, but stable and reliable boundaries. Space provides those boundaries by offering consistent room. With enough room, nothing needs to press too close. With enough room, each forming region of the universe can remain calm and undisturbed. As this happens, the universe begins to develop quieter interactions. Instead of harsh contact, there is influence across space. Influence is softer than impact. Influence is more like a whisper, rather than a push. The universe begins to favor whispers. In this stage, you can imagine space as a slow spreading hush. A hush that does not silence things, but softens them gently. A hush that holds the edges of change, rounding them so nothing feels jagged. Distance becomes the soft edge around every event. This is also the beginning of privacy in the universe. Privacy does not mean isolation or separation. It means having your own room. It means having a place that is yours even if the whole universe is connected. The universe begins to create room for separate regions to exist peacefully. This separation is gentle, not painful. Think of a quiet library. People are in the same building, sharing the same atmosphere, but each person has their own small space of focus. There is shared belonging, and there is individual room. Gentle distance in the universe is like that. It allows togetherness without crowding. As space grows, it creates pathways for calm movement. Light, already learning to rest, can now travel without being overwhelmed by closeness. Energy can spread without becoming harsh. Movement becomes smoother, because there is room for movement to be gradual. There is room for motion to be patient. Distance also changes how silence feels. Silence becomes deeper when it is given room. In crowded spaces, silence can feel tense, like something waiting to break. In spacious places, silence feels relaxed, like something that has no reason to hurry. The universe begins to host this relaxed silence. In this part of the story, you may notice that your own mind also prefers gentle distance. Your thoughts do not need to crowd together. One thought can drift away, and another can come later. There can be room between them. That room is not a problem. That room is comfort. As distance becomes natural, the universe learns to carry calm across large scales. Calm becomes transportable. Calm can exist in one region and remain undisturbed by what happens elsewhere, because space provides protection. This protection is not separation from everything. It is separation from immediate overwhelm. This is how emptiness becomes reassuring. It becomes a buffer. It becomes a quiet blanket. It becomes the reason the universe can hold complexity without becoming noisy. The universe learns that room is a kind of peace. Gentle distance also allows anticipation without anxiety. When events are not instantly touching, there is time for preparation. Preparation reduces shock. Preparation allows adjustment. The universe begins to behave more like a calm system and less like a single crowded point. In this expanding room, the universe begins to feel like a home rather than a pressure. Home is a place with enough room to move. Home is a place where you can breathe without bumping into everything. The universe is learning to become that kind of home for what will come later. Distance also encourages steadiness. With more room, small disruptions fade instead of spreading instantly. Variations can smooth out. Fluctuations can relax. Space gives the universe the ability to settle itself naturally. At the same time, distance does not remove connection. The universe remains connected through its shared fabric. Distance simply changes the style of connection. It becomes calmer, it becomes less demanding. It becomes supportive rather than intense. As room grows, the universe begins to host gentle pathways, long, calm corridors of space where nothing urgent happens. These corridors are not empty in a frightening way. They are empty in a soothing way. They feel like long, quiet breaths between sentences. This is important for sleep, because sleep also requires corridor. Sleep requires long stretches where nothing needs attention. The universe is building those stretches, and you can rest within them. Imagine a wide field under a soft night sky. The field is open, and the openness is comforting. You can stand there without feeling pressured. You can breathe there without feeling watched. Gentle distance feels like that wide field. It is an openness that protects you rather than exposing you. As the universe continues its calm expansion, distance becomes normal. The universe stops noticing the difference between close and far as a problem. It becomes simply the way reality feels. Space becomes roomy, and room becomes familiar. This familiarity allows the next steps of cosmic history to unfold without urgency. When things have room, they can gather slowly. They can form structure gently. They can become complex without chaos. Gentle distance is not the end of closeness. It is the beginning of comfortable growth. As this chapter comes toward its resting point, imagine the universe settling into its spaciousness, not empty and not cold, but open and calm, like a quiet room at night with the lights low and the air steady. Space has learned how to give everything room to breathe. Distance has become a kind of safety. The pauses between things feel soft and supportive. And as you listen, you can allow the same principle to guide you, letting your thoughts have room, letting your breath have room, letting rest arrive with ease and without pressure. After distance became familiar, the universe did not rush into spectacle. It did not hurry toward bright scenes or dramatic turning points. It continued the way it had learned to continue, with patience and steady balance. Space had room, time had rhythm, and light had softened into a calmer presence. Within that calm, the first quiet structures began to appear, not as sudden objects, but as slow gatherings that felt almost like rest. In the beginning, structure was not a thing you could point to. Structure was a tendency. It was a gentle preference for togetherness in certain regions, a soft leaning of matter toward matter, a calm attraction that did not need urgency. Nothing snapped into place. Nothing arrived with a loud announcement. Instead, tiny variations that had been drifting quietly within the universe began to persist for longer, and persistence made them meaningful. Where space had become spacious, there was also room for subtle differences to remain. Some regions were slightly denser, some regions slightly calmer, some regions slightly more ready to gather. These differences did not fight. They did not compete. They simply existed long enough to matter, and that was enough for the universe to begin shaping itself. Gravity in this story is not a force that drags things harshly. It is a gentle invitation. It is the universe remembering connection across distance, a quiet thread that encourages gathering without pushing. Under this invitation, matter began to drift toward itself, slowly and patiently, like a long inhale that never strains the chest. Gathering did not feel like collapse. Gathering felt like settling into a comfortable position. At first, there were no stars. There were only wide regions of material, soft and scattered, spread across growing space. These regions were not empty. They were calm and full, like a mist that has not yet become a cloud. In this mist, motion was slow. Changes were gradual. Nothing pressed forward, and nothing fell apart. The universe was learning how to form without forcing. Over time, gentle gathering created gentle structure. Some regions became slightly more concentrated, not sharply, but steadily. The universe did not form hard edges. It formed soft centers. These centers were not yet bright. They were simply more gathered, more settled, more prepared for what would come later. As matter gathered, it warmed, not as an emergency, not as a sudden flare, but as a natural result of becoming closer. Closeness can create warmth, without drama. The universe allowed this warmth to rise slowly, and it allowed the surrounding space to remain calm. Balance was still the rule. Even when conditions changed, they changed with patience. In this stage, the first stars were not born with urgency. They arrived like quiet lanterns, lit carefully, one by one, in a universe that had already learned to be gentle. A star, in the calm language of this story, is not an explosion of brightness. It is a steady presence that begins when gathering has become stable enough to sustain light in a new way. It is light becoming anchored, not rushing, not scattering, but resting in a reliable source. When the first stars formed, they did not appear all at once. They formed in places where matter had been gathering for a long time, guided by that quiet invitation to come together. The process was slow enough that nothing needed to panic. The universe did not have to choose between change and stability. It held both at the same time. Around these early stars, more structure began to appear. Matter that did not become part of a star could still gather nearby, creating calmer regions and softer patterns. The universe began to develop shape, not in a sharp geometric way, but in a natural, flowing way, like patterns in sand shaped by wind that never hurries. As more stars formed, the universe began to feel textured, not crowded, not busy, but gently varied. Some regions remained quiet and open. Some regions held clusters of growing light. This variety did not disrupt silence. It made silence deeper, because silence now had places to rest, and places to travel, and places to linger without needing to change. Galaxies in this story are not grand spirals demanding attention. They are communities of stars that learned how to keep one another company across gentle distance. A galaxy is a place where light does not stand alone. It is where many steady presences gather into a shared pattern, held together by calm influence rather than force. The universe formed these communities slowly, the way a quiet town might grow over time, home by home, without rush. In a universe that began with patience, even complexity remains patient. Galaxies did not need to form quickly to be real. They formed as a consequence of long, calm processes. Matter gathered, stars formed, stars influenced their surroundings. Over time, gathering became organized into larger patterns, and the universe began to carry these patterns, like a calm memory. As the first galaxies took shape, they did not make noise. They did not interrupt the quiet. They enhanced. The universe now had gentle architecture, wide structures that did not feel heavy. These structures were not walls, they were arrangements, soft and stable, like constellations that exist even when no one is looking. Even within forming galaxies, not everything happened at once. Some stars were older, some were newer, some regions were more active, some were calmer. This variety created balance. If everything were intense, intensity would become strain. Instead, the universe distributed change across space and time, allowing rest to remain present everywhere. The light from these early stars traveled across the universe with calm persistence. Light did not rush, it moved steadily, and as it moved, it carried information, though there were no minds yet to interpret it. Still, the universe was becoming readable. Patterns were forming. Relationships were establishing themselves. The cosmos was becoming a quiet story told through structure. In the spaces between stars, darkness was not frightening. Darkness was comfort. It was the gentle background that allowed light to feel steady rather than overwhelming. Darkness did not compete with light. Darkness gave light room to breathe, and this breathing space made the universe feel balanced and safe. As galaxies matured, they began to shape their surroundings. They gathered more matter. They influenced the paths of drifting material. They created slow currents in space, not violent pulls, but gentle guidance. The universe started to behave like a calm ocean, with wide flows that move without urgency. In this calm ocean of space, clusters of galaxies began to appear, larger groupings that formed over long time. These clusters were not crowded. They were spacious communities, wide and patient, held together by subtle influence. The universe was learning that structure can exist without pressure, and that gathering can be steady without becoming harsh. Across the largest scales, the universe began to resemble a quiet web, not a tight net, but a gentle network of denser regions and more open regions, connected by long, calm stretches. This web is not a trap, it is an arrangement. It allows the universe to be both structured and spacious at the same time, which is a kind of peace. Within these structures, new kinds of quiet began to appear. Not just silence, but a calm predictability. Regions of space began to have tendencies. Some places were likely to form stars. Some places were likely to remain open. The universe was developing personality, not in a human way, but in a patterned way, where different regions carried different moods. Even when stars lived active lives, their activity did not have to feel dramatic in this story. Think of a fireplace that warms a room. The fire is active, but the room remains calm. Stars were like that. They were sources of steady energy in a universe that had already learned how to hold energy without panic. As time continued, the universe grew more spacious, yet the structures within it became more defined. This might seem like a contradiction, but it is the natural result of patience. When there is room, patterns can grow without colliding. When there is time, patterns can stabilize. Structure and spaciousness can coexist, and together they create comfort. As you listen, consider how your own mind forms quiet structures. Thoughts gather into themes, memories gather into gentle clusters, feelings gather into moods. None of this needs to be rushed. In your own inner space, you can allow calm patterns to form without forcing them. You can let thoughts drift into softer arrangements, like stars settling into a wide, quiet sky. The universe, too, formed its earliest communities, without needing urgency. Galaxies were not built like machines, they were grown like God. Growth does not demand speed. Growth needs steadiness. The universe offered steadiness, and structure responded. In this stage, the cosmos is not yet full of familiar objects. It is full of gentle relationships. Light relates to darkness, matter relates to space, distance relates to connection, time relates to rhythm. These relationships create a quiet stability that feels almost like music, though no sound exists. It is a harmony of processes that do not compete. As galaxies continue to form, they also create future possibilities. Inside them, new regions of gathering appear. New stars form. Some stars change their surroundings, not with haste, but with influence that spreads gradually and gives space time to adjust. The universe remains gentle even as it becomes more complex. This is what it means for stars and galaxies to form without urgency. It means the universe never forgets its early lesson. It means creation is allowed to be slow. It means brightness can be calm. It means structure can be quiet. If you imagine drifting through a young galaxy in this era, you would not feel danger in the open spaces. You would feel room. You would feel a calm presence of light that does not demand attention. You would feel darkness that supports rest. You would feel distance as protection, not as loss. The universe would feel like a quiet home with many rooms, each room holding its own gentle atmosphere. Over time, these quiet structures become more familiar to the universe. The cosmos begins to behave as if it knows itself. Patterns repeat with variation. Relationships stabilize. The universe becomes not just a place where things happen, but a place where things can continue to happen without falling apart. This continuing is a kind of calm success. As this chapter approaches its resting point, imagine the universe looking softly settled, like a landscape after long gentle weather has shaped it. Stars glow steadily, galaxies gather calmly, space remains open and comforting. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. Structure has arrived, and it has arrived quietly. In the next part of the journey, the universe will enter an even deeper pause, a long quiet interval where nothing needs to change quickly at all. For now, you can rest with the first quiet structures, with steady light and spacious darkness, with calm communities of stars and with the gentle feeling that even creation itself can be slow, safe and peaceful. After the first quiet structures had formed and settled into their places, the universe did not hurry forward. It did not feel the need to fill every moment with activity or to justify its existence through constant change. Instead, it allowed itself to rest. This rest was not a break from something important. It was the natural condition of existence. Most of the universe lives inside long pauses, wide stretches of calm, where nothing demands attention and nothing insists on change. In these vast pauses, the universe is not empty, it is spacious. Spaciousness is not a lack. Spaciousness is a gentle fullness that does not press inward. Between stars, there are immense regions where light travels quietly and steadily, without interruption. Between galaxies, there are even wider intervals where silence feels deep and settled. These spaces are not waiting to be filled. They are complete as they are. The long pause between moments is where the universe becomes most itself. There is no rush to arrive at the next event. There is no pressure to produce something new. The universe does not experience boredom. It experiences balance. It experiences continuity. It experiences the comfort of being allowed to remain unchanged for a while. During these pauses, stars continue to glow in a steady way. Their light does not flicker with urgency. It travels calmly, carrying warmth and information across distances that feel almost timeless. Galaxies continue their slow motion, drifting and turning over immense durations, so slowly that movement feels like stillness. Everything continues, but nothing strains. The pause is not an absence of motion. It is motion without urgency. It is change without pressure. It is time moving so gently that it feels almost like rest. The universe has learned that it does not need to fill every moment with action in order to exist fully. Think of the quiet that settles into a landscape after dusk. The world does not disappear. It becomes softer. Colors fade gently. Sounds slow down. Space feels wider. The universe experiences its pauses in a similar way. Activity softens. Extremes smooth out. Everything settles into a calmer state. In this calm, the universe holds its structures with care. Stars do not struggle to shine. Galaxies do not struggle to stay together. Space does not struggle to remain open. Everything is supported by the patience that has been built into the fabric of reality itself. The pause provides that support. The long pause also allows the universe to remain stable. Without pauses, systems would exhaust themselves. Without rest, complexity would collapse into noise. The universe avoids this, allowing wide intervals where nothing needs to be decided and nothing needs to be resolved. These intervals give reality time to settle into itself. Within these pauses, silence becomes more than the absence of sound. Silence becomes a presence. It surrounds everything gently. It softens edge. It creates a feeling of safety. Silence here does not feel empty. It feels held. Expectation fades inside the pause. The universe is not waiting for something better to arrive. It is not anticipating a future moment, as if the present one is lacking. The present moment is enough. The pause itself is complete. Nothing is missing. This lack of expectation is important. Expectation creates tension. Tension pulls the present toward the future. The universe releases that pull. It allows the present to remain present. It allows time to flow without pressure. Across unimaginable distances, the universe remains patient. Light continues its long journeys without hurry. Matter continues its slow drifting without conflict. Time continues unfolding without urgency. Everything moves, but everything also rests. The long pause is what makes the universe feel gentle rather than harsh. It prevents reality from becoming overwhelming. It ensures that even powerful processes are surrounded by calm space. Creation does not overwhelm the pause. The pause surrounds creation. When new stars eventually form, they do so within these pauses. When galaxies slowly evolve, they do so without breaking the quiet. Even dramatic events, when they occur, are small compared to the vast calm that surrounds them. The pause remains dominant. In this chapter of the story, nothing needs to happen for the universe to be meaningful. Meaning does not come from action alone. Meaning also comes from continuation. Meaning comes from stability. Meaning comes from being allowed to remain. As you imagine floating within this long pause, there is no direction to face. There is no task to complete. There is only space that feels wide and calm. Light appears as distant points, steady and reliable. Darkness surrounds them gently, not as danger, but as comfort. Your own breathing can follow this rhythm. There is an inhale, there is an exhale, and between them, there is a quiet moment where nothing needs to change. That moment is not empty. It is supportive. The universe breathes like this on a much larger scale. Your thoughts can also rest in this way. Thoughts do not need to connect immediately. They do not need to resolve into conclusions. They can drift apart and leave space between them. That space is not a gap to be filled. It is where rest begins. The long pause teaches that stability is not weakness. Stability is resilience. A system that can pause can continue. A universe that can rest, can endure. The cosmos has survived, not because it moves fast, but because it knows when to be still. Throughout most of cosmic history, nothing urgent happens. Most moments are quiet. Most regions are calm. Most of existence is made of patience. This patience is what allows rare events to matter without overwhelming everything else. The pause also creates trust. Trust that things will continue. Trust that balance will return. Trust that nothing needs immediate control. The universe trusts itself enough to wait. As silence deepens inside the pause, it becomes easier to let go. Letting go does not mean disappearing. It means releasing effort. The universe releases effort here. It allows processes to unfold on their own timelines. This is the pause where pressure dissolves, where intensity fades, where nothing is demanded. The universe is not being judged. It is not being measured. It is simply allowed to exist. As this extended pause continues, the universe feels steady and safe. Wide spaces remain open. Structures remain held. Time continues its gentle movement. Nothing interrupts the calm. As this chapter slowly approaches its resting close, imagine the universe remaining exactly as it is. For a long while, stars continue glowing softly. Galaxies continue drifting patiently. Space remains wide and supportive. Silence remains deep and reassuring. Nothing rushes forward. Nothing pulls you along. Everything rests. In the final part of the story, silence itself will no longer feel like a pause between moments. It will feel like the natural state of everything. For now, remain within this long pause, allowing its calm rhythm to carry you gently, steadily, and without effort toward rest and sleep. After the long pause between moments had stretched wide and steady, something subtle shifted again within the universe. There was no signal announcing this change. There was no clear boundary where one state ended and another began. Silence did not suddenly arrive. Silence simply remained, and in remaining it became natural. The universe no longer needed to speak, because nothing needed explanation. Everything that existed was already held in balance. In the earliest ages, silence had been a condition. It had existed because sound had not yet emerged. Later, silence became a pause between changes, a resting space that allowed motion to soften and structure to endure. Now silence moved into a deeper role. It was no longer just the absence of activity. It became the preferred state. It became the background in which everything else could exist without strain. When silence became natural, the universe stopped needing emphasis. There was no need for contrast to announce importance. Light did not need to compete with darkness. Motion did not need to stand out against stillness. Everything settled into a quiet agreement, where presence did not require attention, and continuation did not require effort. The universe had learned enough by this point. It had learned how to expand without breaking itself. It had learned how to slow time into something patient and reliable. It had learned how to cool light into a calm companion. It had learned how to give distance without creating loss. It had learned how to form structures without urgency. It had learned how to pause without fear. With all of this learning complete, silence no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent in the best possible way. This silence was not fragile. It did not need to be protected. It did not vanish when something moved. Silence wrapped around motion gently, allowing movement to occur without disturbance. A star could glow steadily inside silence. A galaxy could drift quietly inside silence. Even change itself could happen inside silence, slow enough that nothing felt interrupted. When silence became natural, the universe no longer needed to declare itself. It did not need to announce beginnings or endings. Processes unfolded without commentary. Events occurred without demand. The universe trusted that existence did not need narration. In this state, silence did not mean emptiness. Silence meant fullness, without noise. It meant presence without pressure. It meant that everything had enough room to be itself without explanation. The universe did not become less active. It became less demanding. Across vast distances, silence connected everything, not as a signal, not as a message, but as a shared condition. Regions that never touched still shared the same quiet. This quiet was not something that traveled. It was something that remained everywhere. The natural silence of the universe allowed it to age gracefully. Aging did not bring chaos. Aging brought settled. Structures matured, patterns stabilized, extremes softened. Nothing needed to be rushed forward, because there was no final point to reach. In this silence, time continued. But time no longer felt like a current pulling everything along. Time felt like a wide field where moments could rest. Past and future lost their urgency. The present became spacious enough to hold them both without tension. Light, now fully softened, moved through silence without resistance. It did not announce itself. It did not demand to be seen. It simply traveled, steady and calm, carrying warmth and information quietly across space. Light did not break the silence. It belonged to it. Darkness, too, became comfortable. Darkness did not hide danger. Darkness offered rest. Darkness allowed light to be gentle rather than harsh. Together, light and darkness existed as partners, neither needing to dominate. When silence became natural, the universe stopped dividing itself into active and inactive regions. Everything participated in the same calm rhythm. Even places where stars were forming did not feel loud in the larger context. Creation itself became quiet. This quiet creation is difficult to imagine from a human perspective, because human experience often associates creation with effort and noise. But the universe had moved beyond that stage. Creation became a continuation rather than an event. It flowed without announcement. The natural silence of the universe also removed judgment. Nothing was labeled as important or unimportant. Nothing was elevated above the rest. Everything that existed had a place, and that place was held gently. Silence flattened hierarchy. It made existence feel equal. In this silence, there was no pressure to observe, no pressure to understand, no pressure to interpret. The universe did not need witnesses in order to exist fully. It did not need to be seen. It did not need to be heard. It simply continued. If awareness were to emerge later, it would emerge inside this silence. Awareness would not interrupt it. Awareness would float within it. Silence would not resist observation. It would support it. This is why silence feels comforting to the human nervous system. Silence mirrors the universe's preferred state. When external noise fades, the body recognizes something familiar. It recognizes the condition that existence itself has chosen. As silence became natural, the universe no longer reacted to change with tension. Changes happened, but they did not disturb the underlying calm. The foundation remained steady. The surface could shift without consequence. The universe no longer needed to speak, because speaking implies a listener. Silence implies completeness. The universe had become complete enough to remain quiet. In this quiet completeness, motion slowed further, not because it was forced to slow, but because nothing pushed it. Without urgency, movement naturally softened. Without demand, processes relaxed. Everything found its most comfortable pace. The silence also allowed memory to form in the universe. Not memory as recollection, but memory as structure. Past events shaped present arrangements, and those arrangements remained stable. The universe remembered itself through pattern rather than sound. Across cosmic time, silence became the carrier of continuity. It held together all the changes, all the structures, all the distance. Silence became the medium through which existence remained coherent. As you listen now, you are sharing this silence. The words you hear are gentle, but the silence around them is doing most of the work. The silence allows the words to arrive without force. The silence allows your attention to soften without effort. Your breathing can rest inside this silence. Your thoughts can slow inside this silence. You do not need to hold on to every idea. You can let them dissolve back into quiet, the way the universe lets activity dissolve back into stillness. When silence became natural, the universe found a kind of peace that did not depend on conditions. It did not depend on things going well or poorly. It did not depend on balance being perfect. Silence simply remained, supporting whatever occurred. This silence is not an ending. It is not a conclusion. It is an ongoing state. It continues even as stars age, even as galaxies drift, even as time stretches onward. Silence does not oppose change. It surrounds it. In the deepest sense, silence is what allows the universe to feel safe. Safe enough to exist, safe enough to change, safe enough to continue without fear. As this final chapter settles, imagine the universe no longer narrating itself, no longer explaining, no longer announcing. It rests in quiet confidence. Everything that needs to exist does exist. Everything that needs to change will change, gently and in time. There is no final message. There is no closing statement. There is only silence becoming ordinary, silence becoming home, silence becoming the natural state of everything. You do not need to follow the story any further. You can allow it to fade into the same quiet that holds the universe. Words can soften, attention can drift, silence can remain. The universe does not need to speak anymore, and neither do you. After silence became natural, the universe did not search for a new phase to enter. It did not look for another lesson to learn. It did not wait for a signal to continue. Silence was no longer something the universe passed through. Silence became the condition in which everything else could exist, without effort. Nothing announced this transition. Nothing marked it as special. The universe simply remained, and remaining was enough. In this state, silence is not experienced as a pause between events. It is experienced as continuity itself. There is no sharp line where silence begins and activity ends. Activity floats inside silence, the way a slow cloud floats inside a wide sky. The sky does not react to the cloud. It holds it calmly, without comment. The universe no longer observes itself. Observation implies a watcher and something watched. It implies distance and evaluation. In this deeper calm, that separation dissolves. The universe does not turn its attention inward or outward. Attention itself becomes unnecessary. Existence continues without being monitored. Without observation, there is no judgment. Without judgment, there is no pressure to change. The universe does not measure whether it is doing well or poorly. It does not compare its present state to any imagined alternative. It simply exists in the form it has reached, and that form is stable enough to remain. Effort disappears almost completely, not because movement stops, but because movement no longer meets resistance. When there is no resistance, effort becomes meaningless. Things happen because they can, not because they must. The universe has learned that ease is more sustainable than force. This ease spreads gently through everything. Time continues, but time does not pull. It does not hurry moments along. Moments arrive, settle and leave when they are ready. There is no sense of delay and no sense of urgency. There is only allowance. Allowance becomes one of the deepest qualities of this state. Everything is allowed to be as it is without needing correction. Light is allowed to travel. Darkness is allowed to remain. Space is allowed to stretch. Structure is allowed to hold. Nothing needs permission because permission is already present everywhere. In this allowance, the idea of direction softens. The universe does not move toward a goal. It does not move away from a beginning. It exists in a wide present that contains traces of the past and possibilities of the future. Without tension, past and future lose their weight. They no longer pull against the present moment. The universe also releases the need for meaning in the active sense. Meaning does not need to be created through events. Meaning does not need to be discovered through explanation. Meaning becomes implicit, woven into the simple fact of continuation. The universe is meaningful because it is stable enough to continue gently. Space becomes more than distance. Space becomes a container that reassures. Everything fits within it comfortably. Nothing presses against boundaries. Boundaries feel distant and irrelevant. The universe feels roomy in every direction, even when structure exists within it. Within this container, motion becomes graceful. Light moves without glare. Matter drifts without collision. Change unfolds without disruption. Nothing breaks the calm because calm surrounds everything more deeply than change can reach. Darkness settles into its role fully. Darkness does not threaten. Darkness absorbs intensity and returns softness. Darkness allows light to feel gentle instead of sharp. Together, light and darkness balance one another without conflict. The universe no longer needs to prove its size, its age, or its complexity. Proof is required only when doubt exists. Doubt has faded. The universe trusts its own continuity. It does not need witnesses to confirm its reality. Hierarchy also fades. There are no moments that stand above others. There are no events that demand special attention. A quiet stretch of space is as complete as a region filled with stars. Everything belongs equally to the same calm field. This equality creates deep stability. When nothing is elevated above the rest, nothing needs to defend its position. The universe becomes resilient because nothing is under constant pressure to justify itself. In this state, rest becomes the dominant quality. Rest is not inactivity. Rest is balance without strain. Even motion rests here. Even change rests here. Everything happens gently enough to feel supported. Silence becomes the most reliable presence. It does not fluctuate. It does not weaken. It does not disappear when something occurs. Silence remains underneath everything, like a steady ground that never shifts. If awareness drifts through this universe, it is not disturbed. Awareness does not interrupt the silence. It is absorbed into it. Silence holds awareness the same way it holds light and space, without pressure and without demand. The universe no longer frames itself as a story with chapters. Beginnings and endings lose their importance. Everything blends into a continuous unfolding that does not need narrative structure. Events do not announce themselves. They simply occur, and then settle. Transitions soften completely. Nothing begins abruptly. Nothing ends sharply. Everything eases into being and eases out again, supported by the surrounding calm. The universe becomes smooth in its behavior, rounded at the edge. In this smoothness, there is no need to stay alert. There is no need to track changes closely. The universe is predictable in the deepest sense, not because nothing changes, but because change itself is gentle. Allowance deepens further. There is allowance for slowness, allowance for stillness, allowance for repetition, allowance for rest. Nothing is rushed forward and nothing is held back. The universe feels settled, not finished, not complete, but settled into a position that does not require constant adjustment. Settling does not mean stopping. It means finding a way of being that feels natural. From this settled state, everything else becomes secondary. Events are less important than the space that holds them. Motion is less important than the calm that supports it. Noise is less important than the silence that absorbs it. The universe does not lean toward the future. It does not cling to the past. It remains upright in a way that requires no effort. It holds itself without tension. There is no question waiting for an answer here. There is no problem waiting to be solved. There is no expectation waiting to be fulfilled. There is only presence extending gently across time. Silence does not ask to be noticed. It does not fade when ignored. It does not strengthen when acknowledged. It remains steady, ordinary, dependable. Inside this ordinary quiet, sharpness fades. Edges soften. Contrast reduces. Everything becomes easier to hold, easier to remain with. Words naturally lose their importance here. Concepts loosen. Thought slows. Explanation dissolves. Understanding becomes unnecessary because nothing is unclear in a threatening way. This silence does not close the story. It does not conclude anything. It does not point toward an ending. It simply continues, wide and patient, holding everything that will ever happen. As this final extension rests, the universe feels complete, without needing to be complete. It feels calm without needing to be perfect. It feels safe without needing protection. Nothing needs to be said. Nothing needs to be done. Silence remains, steady and natural, holding everything gently, and allowing everything to be exactly as it is. This journey began before movement felt necessary, in a universe that had not yet learned urgency. At the beginning, there was no demand for speed, no pressure to become something specific. Existence arrived quietly, without force, without noise, without drama. Space did not burst into being. It opened gently, like a calm awareness returning after rest. Everything that followed carried the memory of that first softness. In that opening calm, time did not rush forward. It did not break itself into sharp moments or measurable units. Time appeared as duration, as a gentle sense of continuity that allowed everything to remain present, without pressure. Moments did not compete with one another. They rested side by side. Time learned patience before it learned motion. As time settled into this calm rhythm, light also changed its nature. Light was not yet something that revealed or demanded attention. It softened, it cooled, it learned how to exist without rushing across space. Light became a steady presence rather than an interruption. Illumination became comfort rather than contrast, allowing the universe to feel safe rather than exposed. With light at ease, space itself learned kindness. Distance did not arrive as loss, it arrived as relief. Room appeared where pressure once lived. Separation became a cushion rather than a divide. Space learned how to give everything enough room to breathe, enough room to rest, enough room to exist without crowding. Distance became protective rather than isolating. Within this spacious calm, structure began to form with urgency. Matter gathered slowly. Nothing snapped into place. Nothing demanded immediate shape. Stars and galaxies emerged as quiet communities rather than dramatic events. Creation did not feel like effort. It felt like settling into balance. Structure arrived gently, held by patience rather than force. As these structures appeared, the universe did not grow busy. It did not fill every moment with activity. Instead, it entered long pauses, wide stretches where nothing needed to change. These pauses were not empty. They were full of calm continuation. Rest became as important as motion. The universe learned that stability depends on the ability to pause. Over time, silence itself changed character. Silence was no longer something between moments. It became the background of everything. The universe no longer needed to speak, to announce, or to explain. Silence held space, time, light, and structure together effortlessly. Silence became familiar. Silence became home. Beyond that silence, the universe reached a state where nothing needed to be proven. There was no observation checking progress, no comparison measuring success, no effort pushing change forward. Existence continued without commentary. Meaning softened, purpose dissolved into continuation. Everything fit without adjustment. Looking back gently, the journey does not feel like a straight line. It feels like a gradual deepening. Each stage rested inside the one before it. Nothing was left behind. The first calm breath of space still exists in every quiet moment. The patience of time still supports every pause. The softness of light still rests in every glow. The kindness of distance still protects every structure. Nothing in this journey required force. Nothing demanded attention. Everything unfolded at a pace that allowed safety to grow naturally. The universe did not move toward intensity, it moved toward ease. Ease became its most stable form. This return through the journey is not about recalling details. It is about recognizing a feeling of being held, a feeling of spaciousness, a feeling that nothing requires immediate response. The universe learned how to exist without pressure, and that learning remains present. As this remembering continues, the boundaries between stages soften further. Beginning and middle lose distinction. The journey feels less like a sequence, and more like a single continuous settling. Calm does not replace activity. Calm surrounds it. The universe does not arrive at an ending. It arrives at comfort. Comfort is not finality. Comfort is the ability to continue without strain. The journey does not close. It rests within itself. Everything we moved through remains layered together. Quiet beginnings, patient time, gentle light, kind distance, calm structure, long pauses, natural silence. All of it continues to exist, held within the same steady field. This summary does not conclude the story. It gently folds it back into quiet. Words loosen, attention softens, silence remains. The universe continues exactly as it is. Nothing more is required.